What would your reaction be if, standing before hundreds, the pontiff himself were to avert his gaze as you extended your hand in greeting? For Jonathan Roumie, the actor widely recognized for his portrayal of Jesus, this public spurning at the Vatican felt like an unfathomable affront. With his hands suspended awkwardly midair and under the scrutiny of every gaze, Jonathan endured what many would consider an unbearable ordeal. Yet his subsequent action utterly astonished all those present. Why did Pope Leo XIV decline to acknowledge one of the world's most revered Christian actors? What decades-old secret, carefully guarded within the Vatican's clandestine archives, connected Jonathan to an enigmatic Irish nun? And how could a seemingly dismissive gesture evolve into the genesis of something truly extraordinary? Brace yourself to uncover how an initial moment of rejection transmuted into a calling beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The Roman sun streamed through the hotel room curtains as Jonathan Roumie examined the official invitation, its golden Vatican seal clutched between his trembling fingers. His brown eyes, usually serene, now gleamed with a restrained emotion he rarely displayed publicly. The heavy textured cream paper bore the papal insignia in relief in elegant calligraphy, formally inviting him to the canonization ceremony of Saint Faustina Kowalska, the Polish nun known as the Messenger of Divine Mercy. For Jonathan, it was not merely another Catholic event. It was a profound connection to his prior work on the film Faustina, Messenger of Divine Mercy, where he had experienced one of the most significant spiritual transformations of his career. He ran his fingers through his neatly trimmed beard, attempting to calm his rapidly beating heart. "How God works in mysterious ways," he murmured to himself, placing the invitation carefully on the nightstand. Of all people, he chose to set me on this particular path. His reflection in the mirror showed a 50-year-old man with features that blended his Lebanese and Irish heritage, expressive eyes, striking eyebrows, and a countenance many said carried a natural, almost ancient dignity. Jonathan adjusted his navy blue tie over his impeccable white shirt, complementing the dark suit chosen specifically for the occasion. It was not vanity, but respect for the significance of the moment. Every movement was deliberate as he slipped into his inner pocket a small velvet case containing a relic of Faustina, a fragment of fabric that had touched her vestments, a gift he had received during filming in Krakow. The piece was invaluable to him, not for the object itself, but for what it represented. The journey of faith that had led him to this point in his life. The comforting weight of the rosary in his other pocket reminded him of his daily prayer routine, a practice he had intensified since his profound conversion years ago. He paused for a moment, closing his eyes for a brief prayer. "Saint Faustina, intercede for me on this day. May I honor your memory and be a worthy instrument of divine mercy," he whispered sincerely, his voice barely audible even in the quiet of the room. The buzz in St. Peter's Square grew as devotees from all corners of the globe converged to witness the ceremony. Jonathan proceeded towards the side entrance designated for special guests, accompanied by a small group of Christian artists, a composer of sacred music, an icon painter, and a Catholic film director with whom he had previously collaborated. The heat of the Roman summer was tempered by an intermittent breeze that billowed the vibrant banners of the international delegations. The majesty of St. Peter's Basilica loomed before them, its domes and columns a monumental testament to faith and art that always left Jonathan breathless, no matter how many times he beheld it. Swiss guards in their colorful uniforms formally saluted them, verifying their credentials before permitting their entry. The painter, Maria Delgado, gently touched Jonathan's arm, her eyes mirroring the same reverence he felt. "Are you all right? You look as though you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders today," she remarked, noticing the intensity in his demeanor. Jonathan offered a soft smile, the same one that had captivated millions of viewers in his most renowned performance. "I'm simply trying to take in every moment. You know, when I portray sacred characters, I feel the weight of responsibility. But today I am merely myself before something far grander." The marble corridors of the Vatican reverberated with the hastened steps of officials, prelates, and guests as the group was ushered into an ornate hall where the special audience would be held before the main ceremony. Ancient tapestries adorned the walls, depicting biblical scenes in vivid hues that seemed to defy the passage of time. Renaissance paintings, silently observed from the vaulted ceiling, witnesses to centuries of church history. Jonathan felt dwarfed in the face of such grandeur and tradition. The fragrance of incense lingered in the air, mingling with the subtle scent of fresh flowers arranged in strategic displays. Monsignors in purple vestments circulated among the guests, offering words of welcome in various languages. A respectful silence fell over the hall as the doors at the far end opened, heralding the imminent arrival of the pontiff. Jonathan's heart quickened. In moments, he would stand before Pope Leo XIV, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. Beside him, director Paolo Bianchi leaned in and whispered, "Do you recall the protocol?" A slight bow, a handshake should he offer one, and a few brief words. Jonathan nodded, his throat suddenly parched. "I practiced all night, but now it seems I've forgotten every word I had planned to utter," he responded in a nervous whisper, adjusting his jacket for the third time in 5 minutes. Pope Leo XIV entered the chamber, exuding a presence that melded humility and authority. A man of moderate stature, with silvering hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to pierce beyond mere appearances. His simple white vestments stood in stark contrast to the opulent surroundings, serving as a silent testament to the very essence of Christianity. A benign smile graced his features as he greeted those present, pausing to exchange a few words with each. The protocol was conducted with meticulous precision by a master of ceremonies who discreetly announced the names of the guests. Jonathan watched, mesmerized, as the pontiff gradually drew nearer, observing how he devoted genuine attention to each individual, unhurriedly, despite his undoubtedly demanding schedule on that momentous day. Ahead of him, the painter Maria was introduced and received warm commendation for her sacred art, departing the encounter with tears in her eyes. Paolo, the director, followed, bowing respectfully and mentioning his forthcoming project on the life of Saint Francis of Assisi. Now it was his turn. Jonathan felt time decelerate as the master of ceremonies announced his name and his contributions to Christian arts. The Pope turned toward him, and their gazes met for what felt like an infinite moment. "Your Holiness," Jonathan began, bowing slightly, "it is an inexpressible honor to be in your presence on this sacred day." Jonathan's hand extended naturally, anticipating the customary handshake he had observed being offered to others. The ensuing silence seemed to suspend time within the ornate hall. Pope Leo XIV, who until that moment had evinced warm cordiality with all the guests, fixed his gaze upon Jonathan for a brief moment before, quite unexpectedly, closing his eyes and subtly turning his face away. His lips murmured a silent prayer in Latin, ancient words audible only to himself. Jonathan's extended hand remained suspended in the air, hovering in the space between them like an incomplete bridge. A flush crept up the actor's neck to his cheeks, deepening as the seconds stretched on. The hum of the hall gradually subsided, ceding to an awkward silence that seemed to amplify every beat of his racing heart. The other guests observed the unusual tableau with expressions that ranged from curiosity to discomfiture. Jonathan felt the weight of dozens of gazes upon him, witnessing what appeared to be a public rebuke from the Vicar of Christ. His mind frantically sought to comprehend what could have caused such a reaction. Was it something he had said or done, some controversial role he had portrayed, or merely a procedural misunderstanding? Slowly, with dignity, he retracted his ungrasped hand, letting it fall to his side as he strove to maintain his composure. "My apologies if I have caused offense," he murmured softly, the words almost catching in his throat. The Pope's expression remained impassive, his eyes still closed, as if in deep communion with something or someone beyond the present moment. One of the nearby cardinals cast Jonathan a look that blended compassion and perplexity, equally discomfited by the pontiff's unusual demeanor. The master of ceremonies, visibly ill at ease, hesitated before making a subtle gesture indicating Jonathan should move along to make way for the next guest. But before he could step away, the Pope opened his eyes. There was something different in his gaze now, a calculated intensity, almost as if appraising something profound within the soul of the man before him. For a fleeting moment, Jonathan thought he discerned a faint upturn at the corner of the Pope's lips, but the movement was so subtle it could have been merely a trick of the light in the hall's shadows. The pontiff finally spoke, his voice low yet distinct. "Mr. Roumie, there are matters we must discuss in private. Following this reception, please await my summons." There was no elucidation for the preceding strange behavior, only this enigmatic instruction that left Jonathan even more bewildered. The actor inclined his head in acquiescence, striving to process what had just transpired. "As your holiness wishes," he replied, his voice betraying only a slight tremor. "I shall be at your disposal." As he moved away to yield to the next guest, he felt the Pope's gaze follow him, as if still being assessed in some mysterious manner. The remainder of the reception unfolded in a blur for Jonathan, who remained in a corner of the hall, attempting to maintain a semblance of composure while his mind incessantly replayed the disconcerting moment. The other artists from his group discreetly approached, offering sympathetic glances, but assiduously avoiding any direct mention of the awkward incident they had all witnessed. Maria, the icon painter, gently touched his arm in a gesture of silent support. The composer, an elderly man with white hair and a serene gaze, approached with 2 glasses of water, offering one to Jonathan. "You know, my young friend," he began with a tranquil voice that carried the faint accent of his native Poland, "Saint Faustina also encountered numerous moments of doubt and rejection on her journey. Perhaps there is something more profound unfolding here than we can currently comprehend." Jonathan took a sip of the water, grateful for the attempt at comfort, though the words did little to assuage the confusion and hurt he felt. "I have always believed that every experience serves a purpose," he replied, attempting to sound more convinced than he truly felt at that moment. "But I confess this has caught me entirely off guard. After embodying so many spiritual roles, I had anticipated being received differently." The afternoon light began to shift, casting elongated shadows through the stained glass windows and creating kaleidoscopic patterns on the hall's marble floor. The reception was drawing to a close, with groups of guests gradually dispersing to prepare for the main ceremony, scheduled for the following day. Jonathan remained restless, torn between the anticipation of the promised summons and the desire to retreat to process his emotions in private. His gaze roamed the hall, observing the Pope engaged in seemingly cordial conversations with other guests, which only intensified his bewilderment regarding the differential treatment he had received. A young cleric in black vestments and a red sash approached discreetly, leaning in to speak in a low voice. "Mr. Roumie, His Holiness requests your presence now. Please accompany me." Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of apprehension and curiosity seizing his being. He bid farewell with a brief nod to his fellow artists, and followed the cleric through increasingly secluded Vatican corridors, moving away from public spaces toward areas to which few visitors were granted access. Beyond each door they crossed, grandeur gave way to austere simplicity until they arrived at a small studio with walls lined with ancient books and a window offering a view of the Vatican gardens. "Please wait here," the cleric instructed, withdrawing silently. Jonathan was left alone with his turbulent thoughts, the small relic of Saint Faustina weighing in his pocket as a reminder of his journey thus far. "Whatever happens now," he mused, his fingers tracing the velvet casing through his jacket fabric, "I must face it with the same faith that has brought me to this moment." The door opened silently, and Pope Leo XIV entered alone, without the usual retinue of assistants or guards, a gesture of intimacy that surprised Jonathan. The pontiff had removed some of his more formal vestments, now appearing with a simplicity that made him seem more like a village priest than the leader of the Catholic Church. His face, previously inscrutable, now showed signs of a contained emotion that Jonathan could not fully decipher. "Mr. Roumie," the Pope began, his voice warmer than the formal tone employed earlier, "I must first ask your forgiveness for what must have seemed like a public rejection. I assure you there was an important reason for my unusual conduct." Jonathan remained standing, his hands slightly trembling at his sides, still uncertain how to respond. The Pope gestured toward 2 simple chairs near the window, inviting him to sit. The golden light of the Roman dusk flooded the small studio, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. "Your Holiness," Jonathan finally responded, finding his voice, "I confess I was disconcerted, but I would never question your actions. I am here to listen and to understand." The Pope observed him for a moment, as if assessing not only his words, but the sincerity behind them. A soft smile finally surfaced on his face, lighting his eyes with an almost paternal warmth. "You reacted exactly as she said you would," he commented enigmatically, leaning to open a drawer in the oak desk beside him. "Whom do you refer to, Your Holiness?" Jonathan inquired, confusion discernible in his voice. The Pope retrieved a small, intricately carved wooden box from a drawer and placed it on the table between them. "Your grandmother," the pontiff replied simply, "Sister Margaret O'Connor." The world seemed to freeze around Jonathan, the sound of his own heart deafening in his ears. His maternal grandmother, who had passed away even before he embarked on his artistic career, had rarely alluded to her religious past with the family. The few stories his mother had shared included vague accounts of Margaret's time spent in Europe before she returned to the United States, met his grandfather, and left religious life. But there had never been any mention of the Vatican or any connection whatsoever to the Holy See. The look of shock on his face must have been palpable, for the Pope nodded understandingly, as if confirming a long-held suspicion. "I discern this to be quite a revelation for you," commented Leo XIV, his aged fingers caressing the wooden box with a familiarity that suggested he had handled it countless times before. "There is far more to your spiritual heritage than you ever imagined, Jonathan Roumie, and that is precisely why our meeting today could not commence as a mere perfunctory encounter." The actor leaned forward, 1,000 questions coalescing in his mind, yet only one managed to escape his lips. How did you come to know my grandmother?" The Pope delicately opened the box, its contents still concealed from Jonathan's gaze. "Not only did I know her," he replied, his tone a blend of reverence and affection, "but I bore witness to the moment she divined what the future held for her yet unborn grandson, a discovery that would alter the course of many lives, including your own, and in a sense, mine as well." The Pope opened the carved wooden box and retrieved a carefully preserved sepia photograph. The image depicted a young nun with delicate features and expressive eyes. The very same eyes Jonathan saw in the mirror each morning, leaning over a table laden with ancient manuscripts. The setting was unmistakably the Vatican, with towering shelves brimming with bound tomes. At the bottom, a handwritten inscription read, "Sister Margaret O'Connor, Vatican Secret Archives, 1972. Jonathan held the photograph with trembling hands, feeling an unexpected connection to his past. "My mother never mentioned that Grandma worked in the Vatican archives. She only said she had been a nun before meeting my grandfather," he murmured, running his fingers over the image, as if he could touch that fragment of family history he had never known. "I met your grandmother when I was just a young priest assigned to the archives," the Pope explained, leaning back in his chair. "Margaret possessed an extraordinary gift for ancient languages. She was specially recruited to translate newly discovered documents in the catacombs beneath the basilica." The pontiff paused, scrutinizing Jonathan's reaction with keen eyes. "During that work, she uncovered the sealed writings of St. Pius X, documents that had remained untouched for decades, with explicit instructions to be opened only at the dawn of the third millennium." Jonathan leaned forward, utterly engrossed in the narrative that unveiled an unknown chapter of his own lineage. "What kind of writings were these? And what does my grandmother have to do with my being here today?" he asked, his voice blending curiosity and apprehension. The Pope smiled softly. "They were prophecies, Jonathan, specific prophecies about the times we are living in now, and about you." The ensuing silence seemed to bear the weight of centuries. The Pope withdrew from the box an envelope sealed with red wax, the papal seal of Pius X still intact. "St. Pius X had visions concerning the future of the Church," he continued in a solemn voice. "He foresaw a time of profound apostasy when multitudes would forsake the faith. But he also envisioned a light amidst the darkness, a man who, through the art of interpreting Christ himself, would touch hearts that had closed themselves off to the Church's traditional messages." The implications of those words formed in Jonathan's mind, eliciting a mixture of incredulity and reverential awe. "Your Holiness isn't suggesting that I am that person?" he murmured, unable to complete the thought that seemed simultaneously preposterous and terrifyingly plausible. The Pope nodded slowly. The prophecy spoke of a man born of a lineage of faith, the grandson of a woman who served in the sacred archives, who would bear traits of both East and West in his countenance, and who would interpret the Savior on screen during times of profound spiritual darkness. With deliberate movements, the Pope broke the seal and extracted an aged parchment. The calligraphy, its ink darkened by the passage of time, unfurled in ancient Latin across the page. When your grandmother translated this document, she discerned the implications at once. Though you were not yet born, she knew it portended one of her lineage. His Holiness commenced the translation, his voice taking on a liturgical rhythm. An epoch shall arrive when minds are clouded and hearts are bereft of warmth. In that time I shall send a man who will speak to the multitudes through the language of moving images, giving life to my son. This man shall bear the blood of Irish faith and the passion of the Near East. When he stands before my vicar on earth, he must be tested, for only through humility can he receive the mission to rekindle the flame of faith. Jonathan felt his throat constrict with emotion. How could this possibly be about me? I am but an actor striving to live my faith as best I can, he uttered, his voice choked with incredulity. Margaret comprehended the profound import of her discovery. The Pope continued, carefully returning the scroll to its sheath. She discerned that these words were not to be known prematurely, for they could interfere with the free will of the person mentioned in the prophecy, you. He pulled open a drawer and produced a diminutive, leather-bound ledger with aged pages. She transcribed the visions before resealing the original documents. See, here she describes how St. Pius X foretold luminous screens in the hands of every person. A remarkably precise depiction of modern smartphones. Jonathan gingerly took the ledger, recognizing at once the script as akin to his mother's. This is extraordinary, Your Holiness, but also terrifying. The burden of this charge is crushing, he confessed, leafing through pages that appeared to delineate his own vocation with disquieting precision. Margaret devoted months to poring over the documents, the Pope said, his eyes distant, as though re-experiencing that period. It was during that period that she began to question her religious vocation. The prophecies specifically mentioned her descendant, which meant she would have to leave consecrated life to start a family. His Holiness offered a nostalgic smile. I remember her internal struggles, her prayers seeking discernment. She was reluctant to relinquish her vows, but recognized she might be destined for a different path. Jonathan absorbed every word, mentally reconstructing his grandmother's spiritual journey. So she didn't leave religious life due to a lack of calling, but because she believed it was part of a greater plan? He asked, a new understanding illuminating his grasp of the family's past. Exactly. She told me, before she departed, I am not abandoning my service to God, merely changing the way I serve Him. The Pope retrieved one final item from the box, a sealed envelope with Jonathan's name written in the same elegant script as the notebook. Your grandmother left this letter for you, with explicit instructions that it should only be delivered after you had been tested. Jonathan accepted the envelope with reverence. Tested? So the public rejection at the reception? The Pope completed his thought. It was the test she specified. Margaret wrote that her true grandson would demonstrate genuine humility in the face of apparent rejection, not reacting with wounded pride or indignation. The pontiff smiled warmly. And you passed the test exactly as she foresaw, with silent dignity and humble acceptance. That is why I can now deliver this letter to you and reveal your true mission. Jonathan opened the envelope with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter, preserved for decades. His grandmother's voice seemed to echo through time. My dearest grandson, if you are reading these words, it means the time has come and you have been found worthy. What I discovered in the archives showed me that you would be called to a special mission in times of great spiritual darkness. Your interpretation of our Savior is not coincidence, but preparation. God has chosen you to reach hearts that have closed themselves off to traditional messages. I have carried the knowledge of your destiny as a sweet burden, praying that when the time came, you would find the strength to accept this cross and this crown. With eternal love, your grandmother, Margaret. Tears streamed down Jonathan's face. How can I possibly live up to this? He whispered, feeling the weight of the responsibility. The Pope placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It is not by your own strength that you will accomplish this mission, my son. It is by acknowledging your inadequacy that God can work through you. The Pope rose and walked to an ancient cedar chest. These are the plans your grandmother and I have cultivated over the years. He produced a map on which 7 points were marked in red. Pope Pius Rex envisioned 7 Marian shrines that you are to visit, leading retreats for young people estranged from their faith. At each location, a new facet of your mission will be unveiled. Jonathan scrutinized the map, recognizing some of the sites: Fatima, Lourdes, Guadalupe. This seems like something out of a film, not real life, he commented, still attempting to assimilate it all. The Pope smiled comprehendingly. Reality often transcends fiction, especially concerning the Lord's designs. As your grandmother penned, my grandson will not immediately grasp his mission, but his heart will discern the truth when he hears it. The Pope presented Jonathan with a leather-bound portfolio embossed with a cross intertwined with a rose. Peruse these materials carefully. Tomorrow, after the canonization, we will discuss the ensuing steps. Jonathan accepted the folder, sensing its spiritual gravitas. Your Holiness, I still have so many queries. The Pope smiled paternally. And all will find their answers in due course. Your grandmother not only foresaw your destiny, she helped to pave the way for it, transforming her own life so that you might be present here today. The pontiff clasped Jonathan's hands in his own. Now go and rest. Tomorrow we will celebrate Saint Faustina, and thereafter your true pilgrimage shall commence. Jonathan bowed and kissed the papal ring, a gesture that now bore the gravitas of a profound commitment. May I prove worthy of this trust, Your Holiness. May I be worthy of my grandmother's legacy. The morning of Saint Faustina's canonization suffused St. Peter's Square with a golden hue as throngs of the faithful gathered for the ceremony. Jonathan, seated among dignitaries and esteemed guests, felt the heft of the folder containing his grandmother's documents, which he had pored over throughout the night. Pope Leo XIV officiated the liturgy with serene solemnity, but his gaze occasionally met Jonathan's, as if they shared a profound secret amidst the public celebration. Once the ceremony concluded and the new saint was proclaimed, the guests were directed to a reception in the Vatican gardens. It was then that the pontiff approached Jonathan once more, this time before all those assembled. Mr. Roumie, the Pope said in a clear voice that silenced the surrounding conversations. Yesterday, when I first received you, my demeanor caused confusion. I would like to publicly explain the reason for that unusual moment. An expectant silence fell over the assembly, all eyes fixed on the 2 men who now stood at the center of an impromptu circle of curious onlookers. What you witnessed yesterday was not a rejection, but a spiritual test, the Pope continued, his voice resonating with quiet authority. A test established many decades ago, even before this man's birth. The pontiff briefly explained the connection between Jonathan's grandmother and the Vatican archives, revealing that the apparent public rejection had been a test of humility prescribed by Margaret O'Connor herself. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crowd as the Pope turned directly to Jonathan. And what this man did after that rejection was truly incredible, confirming everything his grandmother had foretold. Jonathan's heart quickened as he realized the moment of public revelation had arrived, much sooner than he had imagined. When seemingly rejected by the Vicar of Christ on earth, Jonathan Roumie did not display wounded pride or indignation. Instead, he did something no one expected. The Pope's eyes shone with restrained emotion as he continued. In private, away from public view, this man knelt and began to pray the chaplet of divine mercy for me and for the Church. A murmur of admiration rippled through the assembly. Jonathan lowered his gaze, abashed by the public praise for an act he considered merely natural for his faith. I did nothing extraordinary, Your Holiness, he murmured, but his voice was heard in the attentive silence. I merely sought refuge in the prayer Saint Faustina taught us. The Pope smiled as if those words confirmed something significant. To everyone's surprise, the pontiff knelt before Jonathan. Today we will reverse roles, he said. I ask that you lead all of us in that same prayer now, publicly. Stunned by the unexpected request, Jonathan hesitated only for a moment before kneeling as well. His voice, honed by years of acting, rose clear and steady as he began the familiar invocation, "By your sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world." One by one, the guests joined the prayer, cardinals, bishops, dignitaries, and artists, all united in words of devotion that echoed through the Vatican gardens in a spontaneous display of collective faith. When the prayer concluded, the Pope rose and extended his hands to Jonathan, helping him to his feet. "This is the moment your grandmother foresaw," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The moment when an actor who portrayed Christ with reverence would be called to a greater mission." Before the silent assembly, the Pope then unveiled the full mission. Jonathan Roumie is being called to lead the crusade of the new evangelization, an initiative to reach those who have drifted from faith in the digital world. With meticulous detail, the pontiff described the journey Jonathan would embark upon, visiting the 7 principal Marian shrines worldwide, beginning in Fatima and concluding in Guadalupe, conducting spiritual retreats specifically designed for young people who had abandoned religious practice, creating a series of films about modern martyr saints whose stories remain largely unknown to the general public, and establishing centers for prayer and formation within secular universities, where faith was frequently derided or overlooked. "This is not merely a mission of words, but of living testimony," the Pope continued, turning to an assistant who carried a small red velvet box. "To aid you on this journey, I would like to entrust something very precious to you." He opened the box, revealing a rosary of dark amber beads with an intricately crafted silver crucifix. A murmur of recognition rippled through the assembled prelates. This rosary belonged to St. John Paul II, who used it in his daily prayers during the final years of his pontificate. Now it will pass into your hands, so that the Marian devotion that characterized his life may continue to flourish in this new mission. Jonathan received the rosary with trembling hands, unable to stem the tears that now streamed freely down his face. "I do not deserve such an honor, Your Holiness," he whispered, feeling the historical and spiritual gravitas of the object in his hands. The Pope smiled benignly. "It is not a question of worthiness, my son, but of a divine summons." With a solemn gesture, the pontiff removed the fisherman's ring from his finger and held it aloft before Jonathan. "Your grandmother had written that you would be the new Fulton Sheen of the digital age, a communicator poised to translate eternal verities into a lexicon accessible to emergent generations." Replacing the ring, he extended his hand for Jonathan to kiss, the customary protocol that had been withheld the preceding day. Yet to everyone's astonishment, as Jonathan inclined to proffer the traditional kiss to the ring, the pontiff drew him into a paternal embrace and kissed his forehead, bestowing an impromptu blessing that transcended all established formalities. "By virtue of apostolic authority," the pontiff proclaimed with lucidity, "I hereby appoint Jonathan Roumie, artistic emissary of faith, tasking him with the singular mission of evangelizing through the profound avenues of beauty and art in a world that has forfeited its capacity to discern the transcendent." The ceremony culminated with the pontiff presenting Jonathan with an official scroll, duly sealed with the pontifical insignia, outlining the comprehensive particulars of his mission and the accompanying apostolic benedictions. The assembled guests erupted in spontaneous applause, many with tears welling in their eyes at the extraordinary tableau they had just witnessed. Among the throng, Maria Delgado, the esteemed iconographer, approached with quiet discretion. "When I witnessed his apparent rejection yesterday, I could never have foreseen it culminating in such a profound resolution," she remarked with palpable admiration. Jonathan gazed at the rosary clasped in his hands, and then at the scroll delineating the profound journey that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. "Such is the divine modus operandi," he responded with a tranquil smile. "He transmutes rejections into vocations, humiliations into benedictions, a truth, it seems, my grandmother apprehended all along." As the Roman sun began its descent over the majestic dome of St. Peter's Basilica, Jonathan at last grasped the profound import of the prophetic words. It was through the crucible of humility in the face of rejection that he had been prepared for a singular mission destined to resonate with hearts impervious to traditional homilies. precisely as had been foretold decades prior by his remarkable grandmother and the sainted pontiff, whose prescient insight she had diligently preserved. Should Jonathan Roumie's narrative resonate with you, kindly like, subscribe to the channel, and share. Have you ever encountered a period of rejection that ultimately proved to be a serendipitous turn of events? We invite you to share your experiences in the comments section. And always bear in mind, what may seem like an insurmountable obstacle could in fact be a divine opening to a far greater opportunity. May Our Lady safeguard your path.